Hello friends, my name is JJ, and a while ago I made a video trying to will into existence a new concept called 4D objects. This was my term for a thing like a sticker or a shirt or a character that had 4 degrees of cultural complexity, which is to say 3 distinct cultural concepts that you had to grasp in order to understand the 4th, which was the thing itself. For example, check out this card. I want you to be my Valentine. To fully grasp what this card is trying to communicate, you have to know something about American Valentine's Day traditions, specifically what it means to be my Valentine, and you also have to know what the pointing and the I want you is a reference to, which is of course that famous World War I era military recruitment poster. And then you have to know who Mario is, and I guess this little goblin beside him. So even though this is just a dumb little card, it still demands at least 3 dimensions of cultural knowledge in order to understand the 4th, hence 4D. Another way to think about 4D would be how many things you would have to teach an alien or some person from some untouched desert island tribe before they could comprehend what they're looking at. Okay, so today I thought it might be fun to look at some 4D objects that I've assembled based on everybody's favorite topic, US presidents. These are a collection of what I believe to be some unusually culturally complicated presidential souvenirs, with each one requiring literacy in at least 3 different other cultural concepts in order to fully understand. So let us start with this Richard Nixon rubber toy, which was sold as a campaign souvenir during his presidential run in 1968. All right, so what do we have going on here? Well, first we have a kind of grotesque caricature of Richard Nixon with his big ears and long nose. So I guess the first dimension would just be knowing who Nixon is and the physical features that he's associated with. And secondly, we have him with the body of a circus elephant doing that thing where circus elephants climb up onto a little round platform. Performing elephants, usually imported from Asia, have been part of American circus culture ever since the modern circus was invented in the late 1860s. The popularity of the circus as a leading form of American entertainment in the pre-movie era, in turn, helped establish the elephant's place in the beloved American animal canon. In 1874, the famed political cartoonist Thomas Nast drew this somewhat convoluted cartoon for Harper's Weekly, in which Republicans were depicted as an elephant and Democrats as a donkey, and this is supposedly what began the tradition of the parties being portrayed as these animals in American politics. Hence why we have Republican Richard Nixon as an elephant. The late 19th century was also the era in which the flowery nickname the Grand Old Party, or GOP for short, started being used in reference to Republicans. According to this Washington Post column, that was likely an homage to the nickname Grand Old Man, or GOM, for Britain's Liberal Premier of the time, William Gladstone, given that awareness of English politics was a bigger part of American culture in those days. In any case, by the mid-20th century, knowledge of all of this complex Republican symbology was basically taken for granted, and that's why in 1968 it would make perfect sense for the Nixon campaign to sell a rubber doll depicting their long-nosed, big-eared candidate as a circus elephant standing on a GOP platform. GOP platform. Wow, that might be a whole other level. All right, next up, let us check out this Jimmy Carter coin bank. So when Jimmy Carter first ran for president in 1976, 2 superficial things formed a big part of his personal brand. The fact that he had been a humble peanut farmer in his native Georgia, and his warm, winning smile. After the grim Nixon presidency, a man who was all peanuts and smiles seemed like a refreshing change of pace. The peanut is, of course, one of the most beloved of all American nuts, while a happy politician was still a somewhat novel concept at the time, associated with the young, new, optimistic generation of post-war leaders like the late Jack Kennedy. In reality, however, both of these things were kind of marketing myths. Far from getting his hands dirty in the soil, Carter had simply inherited a 3,000-acre peanut farm from his father, which he ran as a sophisticated agribusiness that made him millions. He was likewise a fairly serious and even dour man who didn't actually smile all that much, as would become painfully apparent during his tortured and troubled presidency. Nevertheless, the grinning peanut became a mascot of the Carter campaign, seen on shirts and buttons, and eventually a giant fiberglass roadside eyesore. And this little piggy bank is a miniature version of it, probably one of the weirdest representations of a president of the United States ever, except, you know, all this other stuff. I've found that there was less weird stuff made of Ronald Reagan than you might expect, maybe just because he was very popular and there was less of an appetite for mocking him. The best 4D Reagan knick-knack that I own is probably this book of Reagan-era Doonesbury comics. Doonesbury being the famously political strip written by Gary Trudeau. The book is called Talking About My Generation. Doonesbury is a really great comic, but it has a pretty steep learning curve just because Gary Trudeau has literally been drawing it for over 50 years. The characters age in real time, and there are a lot of complex plot lines that have been going on for decades. Anyway, in Doonesbury world, the sitting president, whoever he happens to be, is always a character. And in 1987, there was this plot line in which the Reagan White House created a virtual Reagan to help them out. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, for the past few months, the president has been much too busy setting the national agenda to meet with you on a regular basis. We recognize your legitimate needs, however, so White House technicians have recently configured an electronic stand-in who is privy to the president's every thought. He can be debriefed here, or you can access his file 24 hours a day from the comfort of your own workstation. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Ron Headrest.
Yo, press.
Mistakes were made, lies were told.
Bibles were signed.
So sue me.
Sue me.
Now, this version of Reagan is based on a character called Max Headroom, who was from a British show of the same name that aired from 1987 to 1988. It was basically the Black Mirror of its time, a show depicting the horrible dystopian future that awaits us if our modern technology continues unabated. Somebody could probably make a pretty good video essay discussing how much of what they saw coming actually came true, given it's been like 40 years now. But part of the reason why no one has done that is because the Max Headroom character himself was so extraordinarily popular that everything else about the show has been forgotten. Max Headroom was supposed to be a dead guy whose brain was revived in a computer program, and even though he's this grotesque, soulless nihilist who's constantly glitching out, he becomes a mega popular celebrity in the dystopian world.
Max Headroom, 24 hours a day, after day after day, after day after day, after day after day, making tomorrow seem like yesterday.
And the irony is that people in our world also loved Max Headroom, the soulless celebrity homunculus trapped inside of a computer screen. Throughout the 1980s, he was constantly making cameos in music videos and talk shows and commercials and that sort of thing.
If you can't beat it, catch the wave.
So by portraying Reagan as him, Gary Trudeau is making a commentary on the president as a sort of equally empty sort of character, a cheesy entertainer with a broken brain, and only the thinnest connection to reality.
Level with me, white person.
What do you think my chances are?
Truthfully, not good.
Why not?
Well, for starters, you're incredibly shallow.
Shallow? Not so. Like how?
Well, the way you flit from top.
Hi, nice tie.
Want to be my running mate?
The title of the book, meanwhile, Talking About My Generation, is a reference to a very famous song from The Who, which was referenced in one particular Ron Headrest comic where Ron starts pandering hard. He made his move at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
Hello there.
Yeah, you.
Shopping for a fresh face to back in 88?
A computer-age candidate who
Can lead the boomers in a generational charge.
Look no further, white person. I combine the breezy irreverence of yesteryear
With the high-tech hipness of today.
Hey Ed, come take a look at this. All right, after Reagan came George H.W. Bush, a one-term president who people were never all that excited about, meaning interesting souvenirs of him tend to be pretty rare as well. There was, however, one brief moment where people were pretty excited about him, the Gulf War. This was the 1991 conflict between Saddam Hussein's Iraq and the West that was treated as the most important thing in the world at the time, and the amount of fear and hype surrounding the war famously boosted President Bush's approval ratings to record highs. During the course of that conflict, a lot of cheesy merchandise was churned out to capitalize on the immense public interest, with one particularly infamous thing being a set of Gulf War collector cards churned out by the New York-based Topps Corporation, America's biggest trading card company. Collector cards have been around in some form since Victorian times. Notoriously, they were first given away in packages of cigarettes, but also with candy or gum as well. Topps actually started as a gum company. Professional sports were also conveniently invented during the Victorian age, and collector cards of famous athletes proved to be the most popular. By the mid-20th century, companies like Topps had shifted to selling athlete cards with gum instead of the other way around, in sync with the growth of professional sports as one of the major pillars of the new American entertainment economy. And as other things became popular, the big collector card companies would sell cards of those things too, like movies and TV shows, and apparently wars. The Gulf War top cards, which depicted things like jets and tanks and generals, were printed at such a massive scale, they're not remotely valuable today. You can buy entire sealed boxes of them on eBay for basically nothing. But they're still a kind of fascinating, anachronistic artifact for a war that is considered a bit of a historic footnote these days, but at the time was seen as a hinge point for the fate of the world. What I have here is a mint edition Bush card from the series. Mint, of course, being the highest grade of collector card you can possibly have, graded by something called the PSA. What is that? Oh, it's the Professional Sports Authenticator. This is mint grade 9, which is one step below perfect. Obviously, collector cards have become such big business that there's this whole elaborate infrastructure of grading them now. Anyway, the Bush card has him titled as Commander-in-Chief, which is of course the president's title as leader of the US Armed Forces. This particular photograph of Bush is one that he was quite fond of because it depicts him hanging out by the coast in Kennebunkport, Maine, which is where his family's beloved summer holiday compound is located. It was used as inspiration for the portrait of Bush that hangs in the National Naval Aviation Museum in Florida. Okay, now here is a little Matryoshka doll based on Bill Clinton. Matryoshka is a Russian word that means something like Lil Mommies, and the dolls are the most iconic form of Russian folk art, and honestly probably one of the most iconic forms of folk art in general. Like most important things, they were also invented in the late 19th century and were a popular Russian cultural export throughout the Soviet years. From what I understand, they were never really intended to symbolize anything in particular, but these days it has become popular to make novelty Matryoshka dolls depicting a set of related characters or some sort of sequential story. And that is what we see here. We have Bill Clinton, and then inside of him are all of his various mistresses, Bill Clinton being perhaps the most notoriously womanizing president, or at least the president whose womanizing was most actively documented by the American press. So this first one is Monica Lewinsky, who was a White House intern that Clinton had an affair with, which almost got him impeached. Or as Gary Trudeau once described her, an adulteress who almost toppled the government. And then this, I believe, is Paula Jones, who was a woman that Clinton tried to have an affair with when he was a politician in Arkansas. She later filed a sexual harassment lawsuit against him, and this triggered a complex series of events that eventually resulted in the disclosure of his affair with Monica. And here is poor old Hillary Clinton, his loyal wife of many decades. And this last one is a cigar, which is a gross reference to one of the more ribald details of Bill's affair with Monica. I'm sure you can figure out what was going on if you use your imagination, assuming you do not already know. I should also call attention to the fact that the Bill Clinton doll depicts him with a saxophone. Bill had been a sax player since he was a kid, and during the 1992 campaign, this was played up as part of an effort to brand him as young and hip, the first baby boomer president, which in those days was seen as a good thing. This is a doggy chew toy based on George W. Bush, and it's a great example of the 4D principle. So Bush is depicted as a duck with a little crutch, and that's because, as it helpfully says here, he is George the Lame Duck. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, lame duck is a distinctly American expression. It originated in the 1850s to refer to a politician who is regarded as unsuccessful or having few prospects, and the term is now widely used to refer to presidents near the end of their tenure, once the public and the political class has lost any interest in deferring to their leadership. This toy is copyright 2007, and I suspect it was probably made sometime after the congressional midterms of 2006, which saw the Democrats dramatically seize both chambers of Congress for the first time in over a decade, which was widely regarded as the moment that George W. Bush's presidency ground to an effective halt. As someone who was around back then, I remember how common it was to call him a lame duck after 2006, and a lot of liberal people were very gratified that this once cockiest of presidents was finally facing some sort of reckoning for his failed wars and bad economic policies and all of the rest. I wasn't able to turn up much in the way of the history of doggy chew toys, but ducks have long been a popular shape for them. I assume because there is a strong association in American culture between dogs and duck hunting. The other in-joke with this thing is that W the Lame Duck has a cast with all these signatures on it, including Rummy, Condi, and Cairo. This is not only a reference to the popular American custom of getting your friends to sign your cast, but also Bush's habit of calling top people in his administration by cutesy nicknames, many of which became widely used by Americans in general. So Rummy is Donald Rumsfeld, Condi is Condoleezza Rice, and Cairo is Karl Rove. Here is an action figure of President Obama, made by the fine people at Jailbreak Toys. The edges of the box have snippets of the speech that he gave following his election as America's first black president on November 4th, 2008.
If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible,
as we learned from my award-winning video on the American toy canon, action figures first emerged in the 1960s as basically dolls for boys, with the famous Kenner Star Wars action figures of 1977 usually seen as a key point in the emergence of the solid plastic action figures that we know today. You can see that Obama is full of points of articulation. Oh, let me be clear. No, that's not how he sounds. The reason Obama's face looks so weird is because it is based on the famous Obama Hope poster designed by the American street artist Shepard Fairey. This was a ubiquitous symbol during Obama's 2008 presidential run and is today one of the most famous pieces of poster art in American history, endlessly reproduced and parodied. Now, Shepard Fairey has always been somewhat controversial in the art world, because he was often accused of ripping off the work of other artists to make his distinctive posters and murals. And not long after the Hope poster went viral, the latest accusation came forward. The Associated Press, which is America's largest distributor of news photographs, sued Fairey for basing his poster on this picture of Obama that one of their staff photographers had taken at a news conference back in 2007. Now, this could have been a very useful trial because it would have helped clarify a notoriously murky aspect of American law, namely what constitutes artistic fair use of a privately owned picture. But in 2011, the two parties settled out of court with the rights to the Hope poster now jointly owned by both Fairey and the AP. I wonder if this toy was officially licensed by either of them. It's copyright 2008, so I guess it predates the lawsuit. Maybe that's why it was so expensive. This little magnet is what I have for President Trump, probably the most abstract representation I have of any president, next to the Jimmy Carter peanut. You can see it's just a little colored square that says Pantone 11-4198 Presidential Dorito. Trump was probably the first president since Nixon to have his physical appearance widely mocked, with Trump's ample use of a somewhat unnatural shade of skin bronzer, a source of endless teasing. He is certainly probably the only president to be associated with a single color, in this case, Dorito orange. This magnet is done up in the shape of a Pantone color card, which you often get at the hardware store to preview the colors of house paints, but they're also widely used in the graphic design and fashion industries. The Pantone Corporation was founded in 1962 for basically the sole purpose of helping people identify and use consistent shades of color, which was an increasingly important issue in the post-war era as color printing and corporate branding and mass-produced inks and paint became a much bigger deal. My pal Philip Edwards made a fantastic video about Pantone's rise as America's most trusted name in color classification. Doritos, meanwhile, are a beloved brand of flavored tortilla chip put out by the Frito-Lay Corporation, the biggest chip manufacturer in America. Tortilla chips, as the name suggests, are just chips made from fried pieces of tortilla bread. We associate them with Mexican cuisine, but they probably originated from Mexican Americans living in the southwestern US, possibly as a way to avoid wasting tortillas that had gone stale during the Great Depression. They are one of those foods where there's a whole bunch of conflicting origin stories. Anyway, after the war, the Frito-Lay Corporation was the first to start selling tortilla chips commercially under the brand name Doritos, which also has conflicting stories about its origin, but was probably just a generically Mexican-sounding name that wasn't ever supposed to mean anything. During the flavored chip boom of the 60s and 70s, which I discussed in a previous award-winning video, the Frito-Lay people started selling flavored Doritos, with their most popular offering being nacho cheese, which were doused in a neon orange flavor dust. Nacho cheese is basically just a synthetic flavor that is supposed to evoke the taste of Colby cheese sauce and jalapenos you get when you chow down on a big pile of nachos. Nachos having emerged as another popular way to eat tortilla chips after the war. And all of this cultural information culminates in the form of this decorative magnet. Decorative magnets being another decadent post-war American luxury, in this case to decorate their newfangled refrigerators. And lastly, we got this charming Joe Biden mug. It was purchased from the official Joe Biden campaign store back when that still existed. Shout out to my Instagram pal Americanist Memes for hooking me up with this. Be sure to check out their very cool page. So you see, we start out with normal Biden with his trademark aviator sunglasses, but then we pour in the boiling hot water and we get, that's right, Dark Brandon. Dark Brandon is a meme version of Biden that has gotten so popular, even the president himself has embraced it.
I'm gonna be fine with your jokes, but I'm not sure about Dark Brandon.
It has a pretty weird origin though. In 2021, during a post-race interview with NASCAR champ Brandon Brown, an increasingly rowdy crowd started chanting, "Fuck Joe Biden," for some reason, leading to an awkward attempt on the part of the interviewer to do some damage control.
Atlantic, thank you to all of our partners. Oh my God, it's just such an unbelievable moment.
Brandon, you also told me, as you can hear the chants from the crowd, "Let's go, Brandon." Brandon, you told me.
Republicans thought this was the funniest thing ever and soon started saying and posting "Let's go, Brandon" everywhere as a way of telling the president to go fuck himself while also maintaining the thinnest sliver of plausible deniability. But it ultimately backfired, and Democrats decided they actually kind of liked Brandon as a nickname for Biden, especially when he was doing things that triggered conservatives. And thus, Dark Brandon was born, the meme version of Biden, who's based as hell. How well this meme ages will depend a bit on how the upcoming election goes, I guess. Now that Biden's no longer running for a second term, I suspect the degree he can sustain a reputation for basedness will depend a fair bit on whether Kamala Harris gets in or not. Kamala Harris, of course, being a woman who has already established herself within a solar system of complex cultural references of her own. So there you go, a bunch of presidential knickknacks and the four-dimensional cultural stories behind them. If you ever come across any 4D cultural objects of this sort in your life, please do not hesitate to email or Instagram them to me. I know the whole 4D concept can come off as a little gimmicky at first, but I'm confident it can be a great way to do interesting cultural analysis once you warm up to it a bit. And hopefully this video has demonstrated that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Do not forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next week.